For our main topic today, I want to talk about the kinds of goals that are going to impact our strategies and portfolios as we look forward to retirement. I'm going to take this as an opportunity to tell you I am not a financial advisor, and this podcast does not constitute financial advice. This is going to be for educational purposes only. When I work as a financial coach and I'm working with a client who wants to talk about retirement, I can teach my client about the information they need to know in order to understand their retirement. I can teach them the difference between a stock and a bond. I can teach them about the academic goals that could be articulated, the kinds of goals that will impact the strategies that an advisor would recommend. But what I can't do is say, I think you should invest specifically in this portfolio mix, or you should invest in these specific market funds, or whatever it is. I cannot recommend particular securities. So what I'm going to do today is go through the goals that you may hold in high regard as a top priority for your retirement strategy and discuss how an advisor may take your goal, may take your priority, may take your desire and manipulate your portfolio or say, here's the withdrawal strategy that you should consider. It's important, even if we're not looking at retirement in the near future, to understand these facets of retirement planning, because they may very well impact how much money we need to save for retirement, where we save it, and whether or not we decide to DIY our retirement or hire a financial advisor. So what are the four main goals we can have for our financial strategy in retirement? Number one, maximize your stability. In other words, have the exact same buying power every month in retirement into perpetuity. Make sure that you don't have to give yourself a pay cut out of your nest egg at any point. This is for someone who wants to have a very steady and stable, predictable budget in retirement, someone who wants to keep their withdrawal strategy very simple so they could maybe manage it on their own or not have to worry about messing with graphs and charts and thinking about it. They just want to enjoy their retirement. Goal number two, minimize risk. In other words, the number one risk that you have to your nest egg in retirement is pulling out too much of the money, living on it, spending it, consuming it, and then having extra time in retirement, extra life at the end of the nest egg. We don't want to outlive our nest egg. To do so would be exposing ourselves to undue risk. It would not be frugal. Now, you can minimize your risk and be overly conservative to make sure I am not going to run out of money. I know I won't. But there are going to be some trade-offs for that. Goal number three would be to maximize spending. This is going to be for someone who is like thinking, I worked really, really hard for my retirement money. My career was hard and I didn't get to enjoy the weekends and the evenings the way I wanted to. I was working around the clock all through my career. I want to enjoy every cent that I saved. I don't care how much is left over. Well, this is first and foremost contrary to minimizing risk, but there are approaches where you can try to consume as much of your retirement as possible, and we'll get into that after we cover the fourth goal. The fourth goal that you can have for your retirement would be to maximize your net worth at the end of retirement. In other words, maximize how much you're able to leave to the next generation, maximize how much you're leaving to your children. This is for the person who wants to maximize generational wealth in order to bless the generations to come with financial resources. So let's think about these. If you wanted to maximize spending, you're probably not trying to maximize the net worth. So these things are contrary to each other. And if you're trying to maximize spending, you're going to be trading off some risk. So you can't minimize your risk if your main goal is maximizing spending. There are going to be some trade-offs here. Less intuitively, maximizing stability is going to be contrary to all of these. If you minimize risk, you're not going to be able to have a perfectly consistent income. You may also not be maximizing the spending that you can get out of your nest egg if you want just a stable, predictable buying power all through retirement. And the simplest strategy for having a consistent withdrawal rate for your stability is probably not going to be the most conducive for maximizing your net worth that you can leave to the next generation. So what might a financial advisor recommend for not only your portfolio, but your withdrawal strategy given any of these goals being your number one? Let's start with number one. If you want to maximize stability, your financial advisor is probably going to recommend that you have some balance of stock and bond funds diversifying between the asset classes so that you have a more steady roller coaster. Typically, when stocks go up, bonds go down. That's the general asset allocation theory. So they're going to try to mix them in a way that you see a more stable line instead of a crazy wild roller coaster. If you're someone who craves stability and consistency, this is how the advisor will try to reduce your sequence risk for withdrawals and also reduce the emotional impact that you would see from something that does not look stable. And in extreme cases, they may recommend an annuity or ask if you have the access to one of those dinosaur things called a pension, because a pension and an annuity are going to guarantee you income that's going to be fixed. And that guaranteed income is something that you are looking for in your portfolio, even if the pension isn't something that you can leave to the next generation, and even if that annuity is one of the more expensive ways that you can invest your money, as they very commonly are. And the withdrawal strategy has already been mentioned. It's just going to be pick a percentage. We're going to take that chunk, find an annual income, and year after year, we're going to correct that number for inflation. We're just going to ride it up, either going off of actual inflation or some sort of 3%-ish placeholder that is assumed for inflation. That way you always maintain the same buying power. You already know what you're going to pull out from your retirement, and you just run with it. Now, the withdrawal percentage that you pick is a topic for next week, as the number you pick is very important and has varying risk. The more you want to pull out, the higher risk you have. The lower your safe withdrawal rate, all the way down to that ridiculously comical 1.9%, I guess, the lower risk you have of running out of money. The trade-off for having an extra low safe withdrawal rate would be you need to save up a lot more in retirement in order to have a income that treats you properly, the kind of income that allows you to live with dignity in retirement. So let's talk about number 2 now, minimizing risk. If you're wanting to minimize risk, a financial advisor is probably going to go in the same direction as they would if you wanted stability. They're probably going to offer you a mix of stock and bond mutual funds or ETFs, and they're going to say this is the portfolio mix that's going to result in stability and have low risk to you. They may also ask if you have a pension. Well, let's lean into that in order to take away some risk. And they may also recommend an annuity, even if it's a more expensive way to invest. And they may recommend a safe withdrawal rate with a little bit of a catch. And that catch is something that I plan on doing. There's such a thing as a financial guardrail. You can take your retirement income when you're retired, the value of your nest egg, and project the value of it corrected for inflation. If your nest egg ever falls below that particular amount, then you would default to a lower safe withdrawal rate until your nest egg can recover and meet or exceed its original buying power. This approach, this financial guardrail, can significantly reduce your risk of running out of money in retirement. And it's something that I will cover in the next couple weeks of the podcast. Be sure to subscribe and follow if you don't want to miss it. Better yet, send us a question and I might answer it on one of those episodes. Okay, let's move on to goal number 3. And that's going to be maximizing your spending. If you want to maximize the income that you can spend out of your nest egg, well, you're going to be tempted between a couple things when it comes to the portfolio. You might want to go with the aggressive stock so that it can grow as much as possible. And as you're pulling that money out, you know that the growth in the future is going to result in more spending. Now, that's going to be for someone who has a very high risk tolerance. A financial advisor may recommend something that is a little more conservative if you are wanting to preserve the buying power of your nest egg and still spend it all. They're going to really push you towards doing more bonds there. On the video, if you're looking at the table, I just say aggressive stocks, but that's because it has the highest propensity to increase your spending at a much higher risk. Now, let's talk about the withdrawal strategy. You could either go with a higher consistent percentage that you take out, and you can maybe even put in a financial guardrail that's on the top side, something that triggers a higher safe withdrawal rate if your portfolio grows to exceed a predetermined growth rate. For example, let's consider a hypothetical beginning nest egg and say it continues to grow at an average of 10% a year, and we draw that line. Well, if your buying power of the nest egg ever exceeds that value for that line that you draw out in the future, well, you increase your safe withdrawal rate from, say, 4% to 5, 6%, something that is a little bit higher. Your nest egg has done a great job growing. You might as well chew into it a little bit more. Another withdrawal strategy that a financial advisor may recommend to you is called the 1/n strategy. I think this is probably the riskiest of all the scenarios. The N stands for the number of years you think you have left in your life, the number of years that you plan on spending money in retirement. What you do is you take your nest egg value, divide by the number of years you think you have left, and that equals how much you can pull out this year. And then you repeat the process, always subtracting from that N, more or less counting down to when you think you're going to croak. And here's where the real risk with that is. What if you're wrong? What if you think you're going to live to 85 and you make it to 102? Well, 17 years is nothing to sneeze at. And if you run with this and you start with a lower age and then realize, well, I think I'm actually going to live longer than I wasn't expecting it, and you try to shift strategies, well, you're going to end up with a much lower income for the later half of your retirement. And that may not be healthy. In retirement, there's a thing called the retirement smile. When you first retire, you're going to be younger. You're going to have energy to go do all the traveling dreams that you've envisioned for your retirement. And shortly after, you're going to get old enough that doesn't seem like fun or exciting anymore, and your spending is going to drop. And toward the end of your life, your medical expenses are probably statistically going to increase, so your spending goes back up with them. It makes a smile curve. And the 1/n strategy doesn't very well lend itself to that, nor does having a consistent, predictable buying power for that matter. Before I ramble too much, let's jump on to goal number 4. For goal number 4, you want to maximize how much you leave to the next generation. Well, you're probably going to be pushed more towards stocks than bonds for your portfolio mix, and even all the way to growth or aggressive growth stocks. Again, assuming you have a high risk tolerance and you're willing to take on that additional risk in order to grow the portfolio for the next generation. In my opinion, statistically speaking, the all-stock portfolio or a growth stock portfolio in retirement is going to outpace a stock-bond mix if you can get the safe withdrawal rate that you're applying or your withdrawal strategy to be a low enough burden on the growth. But you'd really have to focus on minimizing the impact that you have on the growth of that portfolio, which is to, in other words, minimize your retirement income. You're going to pick a fixed withdrawal rate, or your advisor is going to tell you, Let's not do 4%. Let's maybe try 3.5% or 3%. And we'll go ahead and throw in maybe even a financial guardrail on the bottom, like I mentioned before. And when the value of your nest egg drops below this line, we'll drop you down to a lower safe withdrawal rate for duration so it can recover. And you know that your nest egg is going to pick back up. It's going to continue growing. And you don't have to worry about eating it all up and not having anything left to leave for generational wealth. Now, every advisor is going to give different advice, and not every advisor is going to consider these goals. If you're thinking of sitting down with a financial advisor or a financial coach in the near future, if you're looking for a coach, please consider me. But you're getting ready to sit down, you're wanting to talk about retirement, consider these 4 goals. Think about which ones matter most to you. Maybe come up with the list, what's most important, what's least important. And when you know your goals and you know the priorities you have in retirement, you can have a much more informed conversation with your advisor about what it is that you want your portfolio to do for you and what kind of strategy you expect them to implement once you hit retirement. My goal with today's episode here is to make sure that you are very well informed for that conversation, or that you are now all the more prepared to run your retirement portfolio, your retirement strategy on your own if you choose to go it alone. So what did you think of today's episode? Do you think that these are reasonable recommendations that a financial advisor might make? Do you think most financial advisors would agree or disagree with the matrix that I put together? Have you ever thought about these retirement goals, portfolios, or strategies before today's episode? Have I made you think a little bit about what you're going to do in your retirement? What's going to make the most sense for you? And most importantly, what is the actual tangible risk when it comes to safe withdrawal rates when you throw around the numbers like 3% or 4% or 5%? What is the real risk here? How do I grasp that risk? Well, I'm glad you asked. I ran a study on retirement safe withdrawal rates using a Monte Carlo simulation and some very realistic assumptions that I don't think are paralleled in any similar study. And that's what we're going to be talking about next week. I'm going to be going over the results of my study, the implications that they have as results from the assumptions, and hope that they help you. Again, follow and subscribe if you don't want to miss it. And don't forget to share this podcast with anyone whom you think can benefit from this financial wisdom. Until next week, until next Tuesday, budget bravely and enjoy your hope-filled financial future.